Well, welcome to Mech. I am a complete sucker for good old-fashioned reunions. And I know you are too. You know why I know this? Because this stuff literally blows up the internet. I'm talking about billions and billions, trillions of views. For instance, here's one where soldiers are reunited with their families. You gotta watch this. Why do they have to put that song behind it? That's just not fair. But it's not just about being reunited with people. We go just as crazy when people are reunited with animals. Look at this one.
After this 14-year-old boy's dog named Piper he got for his birthday went missing, he was devastated. His dog was missing for over 2 weeks and he thought he would never see him again, until he was finally found, and his mom came to pick him up from school to surprise him with Piper. The moment he saw him through the window, he was shocked and broke down in tears. He finally opened the door to reunite with his best friend, and his dog was super excited to see him again.
It's so innocent, but I'm convinced there's no better reunion scene on this planet than the one from the best movie trilogy of all time. And I stand by this. Take a look.
Gandalf?
All right, well now I have to go watch all the movies again. We love stories where people are reunited, don't we? Stories where people are brought back together, stories of reconciliation. Something in us is so drawn to it. But not all reunions are easy, are they? Some reunions are painful. Some reunions require reconciliation. Some require forgiveness. And those kinds of reunions demand something of us. Resilience. We've been in a series called The Resilient Life. We're unpacking one of the most remarkable stories recorded in the Bible as a case study in resilience. And it's the story of a man named Joseph. And when it comes to building a truly resilient life, man, Joseph's our guy. Whether you've been with us for this whole series or you're just joining us today, here's what you need to know walking into this final part of Joseph's story. His story begins at just 17 years old with a bright future, but then a string of traumatic events marks the next 13 years of his life. We see him betrayed by his brothers. He's nearly murdered. He's sold into slavery. He's falsely accused of a crime that he didn't commit. He's thrown into prison. He's forgotten about for years. He's just waiting in silence. And then, out of nowhere, he's promoted to the second most powerful man in Egypt in a single day. And every step of the way, one thing that kept Joseph standing was resilience. Resilience, as we talked about week 1, is the ability to sustain ambition in the face of adversity. It's a great definition. And as we've seen throughout this series, Joseph's ambition was never fame, it was never fortune, it was never self-made toughness. His ambition was God. That was the secret to Joseph's incredible resiliency. It's what got him through every single adversity. And then fast forward, Joseph is 37 years old now, and he's living the vision that God gave him as just a kid, right? And he's running one of the wealthiest nations of all of human history. He's lived through 7 years of abundance, but as we'll see today, those days of abundance are about to be over, and 7 years of famine are just beginning. It's Joseph's final test. Well, the famine hits not just Egypt, we're talking about everywhere in that known world. And Pharaoh pretty much throws Joseph the keys and he says, figure it out. And it really was an unprecedented responsibility for a 37-year-old, something you're not going to see many 37-year-olds doing. And people are showing up to Joseph starving. It's life or death. It's every single day, too, for 7 years. An entire nation is depending on grain that only Egypt has. And little did Joseph know that the weight of this responsibility that he was carrying was about to get even more complicated when out of nowhere, the family that tried to kill him, the family that sold him into slavery 20 years ago, is about to walk right back into his life. I mean, talk about a painful family reunion, right? But we know that Joseph is resilient. So what does it look like to be resilient when the trauma of his past comes back to haunt him in the middle of a nation in crisis? I mean, imagine the emotional weight of it all. His family, his father's family, an entire nation, they're looking to him for survival. And there are, plenty of painful memories, wounds, all sorts of emotional baggage wrapped up in all this. And you can only imagine how Joseph must be feeling. Like the walls are pressing in from every direction. And that's usually what breaks people. It's not the one thing. It's all the things, right? All the things landing in the same season. It's the marriage and the job. It's the health scare. It's the family drama. And it's all showing up together until it feels like there's no version of you left that can actually handle it all. It's just overwhelming. And so that's the context of where we're at in the story. Joseph's going through a lot. So let's read what happens next. It says, since Joseph was governor of all Egypt and in charge of selling grain to all the people, it was to him that his brothers came. And when they arrived, they bowed before him with their faces to the ground. And Joseph recognized his brothers instantly. But he pretended to be a stranger, and he spoke harshly to them. Where are you from? He demanded. From the land of Canaan, they replied. We've come to buy food. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they didn't recognize him. Okay. Let's stop there for a minute and let's talk about this. So what does Joseph do when his family shows up? Well, he acts like he doesn't know them, which is more on that in a minute and why he did that. And of course, they don't recognize him, and I don't know why they would, because he's not the 17-year-old kid that they threw in the pit 20 years ago. That was like a whole history ago. Joseph's a man now, and he's the second most powerful man on earth. So yeah, he's going to present himself a little differently. But Joseph hadn't forgotten. he recognized them immediately. You can only imagine that those faces are scarred in his brain, right? And everything he reconciled 20 years ago comes rushing back at once. And as we'll see in just a minute, this is going to be deeply emotional for Joseph to walk through. Joseph has shown a lot of resilience up to this point, but what about emotional resilience? As we saw last week, Joseph had moved on from the past. I mean, he named his sons, showing and proving that he was good. He was in a good place, right? The fact that his family is unexpectedly stepping back into his life is a whole new kind of adversity that he hasn't faced. So as we'll see later in the story, Joseph is going to tell us, in his own words, that he'd already made peace with what happened to him. He'd already seen God's hand in every bit of his situation. So what happens next, and this is important for you to know, isn't a man trying to decide whether he can trust his brothers enough to forgive them and move on. That was settled in Joseph's heart a long time ago. What we're about to see is something else, because what Joseph understood is that forgiveness and reconciliation, they're not the same thing. Forgiveness, Joseph could work through on his own. He could handle that in his own heart before God. His brothers wouldn't even ever need to know about it, right? Reconciliation, on the other hand, actually rebuilding a relationship, that takes both sides. And I think Joseph intuitively knows that this is going to be painful, really painful to walk through. Joseph may have settled things in his own spirit, but what about his brothers? Have they actually changed? And so Joseph makes a plan. And it's a plan that will give Joseph everything he needs to know about his family. He'll know exactly where they stand. And what he does is first he accuses them of being spies. And he tells them, you don't come back unless you have your youngest brother. Now, the youngest brother is Benjamin. Benjamin hasn't been introduced yet in the story, but he was Joseph's only full brother. And he was very young when Joseph was sold into slavery. And as we'll see, Joseph is very eager to see him. It was a relationship that he never got to have. And the catch of all this is Joseph's father, Jacob, was so distraught after losing Joseph 20 years ago that he refused to let Benjamin go to Egypt. He was terrified of losing him too. And Joseph's half-brothers, the ones who threw him into the pit and betrayed him and all that, they obviously knew this. And so this wasn't good news for them. They were trying to think, okay, how do we convince our father to let us have Benjamin and figure all this stuff out? And so they start talking amongst themselves. Let me pick up the story from there. It says, speaking among themselves, they said, clearly we are being punished because of what we did to Joseph long ago. We saw his anguish when he pleaded for his life, and we wouldn't listen. And that's why we're in this trouble. Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy, Reuben asked, but you wouldn't listen. And now we have to answer for his blood. Of course, they didn't know that Joseph understood them, for he had been speaking to them through an interpreter. Now he turned away from them, and he began to weep. And when he regained his composure, he spoke to them again. And then he chose Simeon from among them and had him tied up right before their eyes. Okay. Here's what I want you to see in that whole section. So first, imagine Joseph hearing, after 20 years, his brothers finally admitting what they did to him was wrong. It was wrong. And he's hearing that with his own ears. Even if he had moved on, that moment must have been so emotional for him. Not to mention, it's possible that there was genuine compassion that Joseph was holding back, at least for now, because Joseph was working towards something. He had a plan that would not only assess whether his brothers were ready to reconcile, but also work toward reuniting with his entire family in Egypt, particularly with his father and his full brother Benjamin, the relationships that he missed out on. I'm sure he just misses them. So again, first he accuses them of being spies and puts them in custody. Second, he demands that they go get the youngest brother Benjamin. And then third, he keeps one brother Simeon in custody and lets the other brothers leave with all the food that they came with. And he even snuck all the silver that they had brought back in their bags, which he's up to something with that. And then Joseph says, if you bring Benjamin back, then this will prove that you aren't spies. Okay, what's really going on here? What's going on with this plan? Well, it's actually interesting. By Joseph keeping one brother in custody and letting the others go with everything that they came for and came with, Joseph is able to accomplish two things. First, he's hoping that it ensures a reunion with Benjamin in Egypt. I mean, he really genuinely wants Benjamin to come back. He wants to see him. But he's also orchestrating the same opportunity for the brothers to portray Simeon the way they portrayed Joseph 20 years ago. Did you catch that? Leave one brother for dead, take all the silver. Sounds familiar, right? And so the question is, will they actually come back to save their brother? Or are they just going to continue their pattern of, hey, great, we'll betray you, take the money and go? And so Joseph does what a lot of people never do. He gives his family a chance to show that they've changed. I mean, it's been 20 years after all, and make no mistake. That takes an enormous amount of resiliency. I mean, he could barely hold back from weeping. This is hard. This is emotional. This is different than the betrayal. This is different than the pit and the slavery and the imprisonment and the silence and the pressures of running a nation. And I mean, in many ways, it seems as though this is even maybe the hardest thing that Joseph has had to go through. Well, the brothers go back. They tell their father Jacob everything that had happened, and they convince Jacob to let them bring Benjamin with them to Egypt. And so Joseph's plan is going exactly as he hoped. And so Joseph invites them to dinner. And when Joseph sees Benjamin, his own mother's son, the brother he barely knew before he was ripped away from his family, it says that he had to leave the room, and he goes to his private quarters and he just weeps. And then he does something small but very telling, all part of his plan. He seats the brothers at dinner in the exact birth order, which they would have been amazed at. And he gives Benjamin 5 times the portion that everyone else gets. Now that might seem a little curious to you, but Joseph knows exactly what he's doing. He's watching. He's waiting and he's seeing, okay, whether all of that old jealousy that he had experienced is still alive in that room, or whether something in these men has actually changed. Do they treat Benjamin the way that he was treated? But this is still only the first part of Joseph's plan. It's a masterful plan. So as the brothers start their journey home again, Joseph has his silver cup and he plants it in Benjamin's sack. And then he sends men to chase them down and accuse them of theft. And the punishment that they say is being in slavery for whoever's actually guilty of stealing the cup. And so they go around one by one from oldest to youngest. It's very dramatic. And the cup is found in Benjamin's bag. Joseph gets exactly what he wanted. Benjamin stays in Egypt, and the brothers have a chance to show their true character. And here's how. They could hand Benjamin over in a heartbeat, and they could walk away clean. It's the exact same setup as 20 years ago. Leave one brother behind, keep everything for themselves. But instead, all of the brothers return to offer themselves as slaves instead of Benjamin. Judah, one of the half-brothers, steps forward and he pleads with Joseph. Now keep in mind, 20 years ago, these same men said, screw it to their brother, and they sold him for silver. And now one of them is stepping forward and he's offering his own freedom to save another brother. That's what Joseph needed to see. Not an apology, not a promise, proof of a changed heart. And so Joseph easily could have shut his brothers out, but that's not resilience. And that's what you have to understand about this whole story. That would have been weakness. You see, it's easy to walk away from a relationship. It's a lot harder to stay and work toward restoring a relationship. And true resilience always works toward reconciliation. As we've seen throughout the whole series, Joseph is resilient. These weren't the same brothers that Joseph knew. These were changed men. Okay? Let's see what happens next. It says that Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, "Out, all of you." So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. And then he broke down and he wept. And he wept so loudly the Egyptians could hear him, and word of it quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. "I am Joseph," he said to his brothers. "Is my father still alive?" But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. "Please come closer," he said to them. So they came closer, and he said again, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset, and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. This famine that has ravaged the land for 2 years will last 5 more years, and there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God has sent me ahead of you to keep you and your families alive and to preserve many survivors. So it was God who sent me here, not you. And he's the one who made me an advisor to Pharaoh, the manager of his entire palace and the governor of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and tell him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me master over all the land of Egypt. So come down to me immediately. You can live in the region of Goshen. You can, where you can be near me with all your children, grandchildren, your flocks and herds, everything you own. I will take care of you there, and for there are still 5 years of famine ahead of us. And otherwise you, your household, all your animals, they're going to starve." Then Joseph added, "Look, you can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that I really am Joseph. Go tell my father of my honored position here in Egypt. Describe from everything you have seen, and then bring my father here quickly." Weeping with joy, he embraced Benjamin, and Benjamin did the same. And then Joseph kissed each of his brothers and wept over them. And after that, they began to talk freely with him. It's just meaningful, isn't it? When you see the fruit of choosing resiliency. Through all of the adversity that Joseph had faced, we never see him throw in the towel. We don't. We never see him lose faith. And this scene is no different, is it? Joseph doesn't reveal his identity and then launch into these accusations, right? He doesn't rub the past in his brother's face. He reassures them. He essentially says, don't worry. God was working through this the whole time. And that's not something that Joseph is figuring out in this moment. That's a man reciting a truth that he's clearly already lived with for years. He'd already made peace with the pit and the slavery and the false accusation and the prison. He's already looked back at every piece of his own suffering and seen God's hand just holding the entire situation, holding his hand the entire time. And so Joseph sends for his father. The whole family moves to Egypt. Father and son reunited after 22 years. Why? Because a resilient life forgives. A resilient life always works toward reconciliation. And Joseph could have given up on the relationships, but he stayed and he fought for them and he did the hard relational work needed to bring about restoration, because his ambition was God, and God is always working to restore. You know, it reminds me of a story. It went viral not too long ago. It was a moment in a courtroom that took everyone off guard. It was a woman who was sentenced to 10 years in prison for killing an innocent man that she shot when she mistakenly entered into his apartment, believing it was her own. And the family of the deceased just couldn't bring themselves to forgive her. That is, until the brother of the man she killed stepped up and spoke. And I want to show you this because I think it has a lot to do with what we're talking about today.
I can speak for myself. I forgive you. And I know if you go to God and ask Him, He will forgive you. And I don't think anyone could say it. Again, I'm speaking for myself, not even bad for my family. But I love you just like anyone else. And I'm not gonna say I hope you rot and die just like my brother did, but I personally want the best for you. And I wasn't gonna ever say this in front of my family or anyone, but I don't even want you to go to jail. I want the best for you. Because I know that's exactly what both of them would want you to do. And the best would be give your life to Christ. I'm not gonna say anything else. I think giving your life to Christ would be the best thing that both of them would want you to do. Again, I love you as a person. And I don't wish anything bad on you. I don't know if this is possible, but can I give her a hug, please? Please?
Yes.
That is a resilient life. That's the kind of life that God wants for us. He wants for you. Radical forgiveness, unprecedented reconciliation, the same kind that God shows us every single day. That's the kind of life that Joseph lived. And you know what? The Bible says Joseph got to enjoy 17 more years of restored relationship with his family in Egypt. Why? Because he was resilient enough to extend forgiveness. He was resilient enough to restore what was broken. And that resiliency only comes from a man whose ambition was fixed on God. A God who has endured more pain, more betrayal, more rejection than any of us ever will. And he still chooses over and over to forgive and to restore. And if God can look at what we've done and still choose to forgive us completely, how could we possibly withhold that same forgiveness from someone else, right? Whatever we intend for evil, God intends for good. And the only way for us to experience a truly resilient life is through Him. It's through Him. All right, let me pray for you. Father, thank you so much for Joseph's story. God, it's been so powerful to go 3 weeks and just pull back the curtain and see how you had worked in his life, building this resilient man. And Joseph's story, if it teaches us anything, it's that the resilient life is the best life we could possibly hope for. And that until we bend that knee, make you our ambition, we'll never be able to experience that. Until we trust you to carry the load instead of trying to carry it ourselves, we're never going to experience that. And for anyone who's listening to this right now, who's wrestling with forgiveness, who's wrestling with reconciliation, I pray that they catch a vision of what it would look like if you were the one to end that story, not them. Thank you for forgiving us and all of our sin, all of our brokenness. We pray that we can do the same for others. I pray all that in your name. Amen.